Hey, everybody, this is me. I'm glad to be here once again, chopping it up with the folk I love to talk to who are interesting and fascinating folk who are engaged and involved in all kinds of things, all kinds of ministry related, faithful related, or even if they're not people of faith necessarily, they some good folk that's doing some good work. We call this platform Relevant Conversations with yours truly, Bishop John Seldis, and we got a special one tonight. We were chopping up recently out of the blue. You know, this how Spirit do you. Just out of the blue, they hit me up on the social medias and sends me a something or another. And all of a sudden I said, Lord, that go. And it made me remember this is somebody, one, that I love, two, that I have found involved in some very interesting things, somebody who is passionate, faithful, and somebody I just, as my people would say, I just enjoys, just enjoys them. It's just good folk. You know how it is when you with good folk, you just are with good folk. And every now and then it's just good to remember, quite frankly, that you are related to some good folk. How about that? And so I said to them, listen, would you mind doing one of my web-based podcast shows and being in conversation with me? Let me tell you what I'm doing, and they agreed. Let me just stop, delaying, and let's get on into this conversation. My dear sister and friend hails from the East Coast. She a DC, one of them DC people, up in there somewhere t'other, and has a very, very fascinating history. Of course, most of us come from the South. Our peoples come, up and through and all that kind of, as Bill Land would say, on no kind of basis. I'm channeling Bill Land right here, right now. For those of you who would know who our ancestor and beloved brother was, somebody very important to me and my faith walk and journey into the United Church of Christ. This dear loved one of ours has journeyed quite a bit over these last. I was kind of counting, and when it started to get over 20, we start going back just a little ways, because I'm not but 29 and holding. That's I'm 29 and holy. Let me bring to our platform. They are now, our sister is now living in Costa Rica. So listen, we got a global conversation afoot right here, right now. I want to bring to this platform, and we'll do some more conversation about where she comes from and what she's been up to. But our sister beloved, the Reverend Diane Ford Dessables, and well, I'll just say, come on in the room, sis.
Hey. Good to be in the house. Good to be in the house with you, brother. Always. It's been too long.
It's been way too long. So listen.
We ain't gonna spill all our secrets out here now today. We'll share some of them.
That's right. We're not gonna cover all the tea.
That's right.
A little bit. I'm gonna go back to the beginning. We were just reflecting about this a little bit. We met each other. Obviously, we was out there on the line doing the work early in some of the justice forming days of, I want to say, the 19 something another, back in the day. And I believe we there was a trip or two into DC that connected us. And what I remember is you were doing, not long after meeting you and hearing a little bit of your story, and I think this was even prior to seminary, but it might have been up in there somewhere. Your work with Bread for the World.
Well, my work with Bread for the World came long after seminary. I actually. We probably ran across each other when I was working for the Potter's House Cafe right after I came out of seminary. And Ruby Sales was always visiting, dropping in from time to time. And Marion Wright Edelman would walk in, and on her heels would be the neighborhood homeless guy looking for his suit. And that was like a hub, a gathering place for social justice folks who would come together trying to figure out what their next moves were going to be. This was long before there was such a thing as a busboys and poets in the DC.
Right.
The Potter's House was the busboys and poets back in the day. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we weren't stomping around there at the same time, long before either one of us got to, be UCC affiliated.
Well, that's probably true. In fact, it was, for me, it was really the coming into the early 90s that I even knew what a UCNC was, quite frankly.
I feel you.
For me, I did know some of the strands of the UCC. So where I come from the STL, from the LU, we knew the Evangelical and the Reformed, the ENR folk, right?
Okay.
Right. So, and I knew Eaton Theological Seminary. So the Negro boys were, and all of that. I went to school in the 1980s, and so it was my beginnings in theological education and understanding, coming to terms with that I had spirit coming out of my
Hey.
But it wasn't nothing wrong with some book learning and some reading.
There you go.
And some theorizing. And I remember in particular, my first New Testament class was taught by a Jewish rabbi.
Come on now.
In undergraduate school, which was quite an amazing thing. I can't get on that side. That's a sidebar. You and I should talk about that later.
We should talk about it, because my New Testament professor was Kane Hope Felder at Howard University. And he had just put out he was just putting the final touches on the African American Heritage Study Bible.
The study Bible, sure.
Yep.
I have a signed copy of that Bible that he signed. He gave it to me and signed it.
Okay. I was at Howard till I ran out of money, and then white folks at Boston University said, "Come on, child, we'll try to give you a penny or two." So I went up north. But the Kane Hope was the man.
Were you at Howard when Elias Fairjohn?
Yes, Elias was my cousin.
Is that right?
No kidding. Yeah.
Anyway, that's a whole other conversation.
And yes, I was there. I was in his class. And no, he did not grade on a curve, not for me or anybody else.
No. I would
That
say,
was a deep brother. Woo, he was
yeah,
a woo. Them was something else. Them was something else.
we calling some ancestors right here.
Woo, 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 woo.
Dr. Felder was kind and sweet to me.
Yeah.
But Brother Farajaji was my kinfolk,
Yeah.
and
And I'm
he,
glad you mentioned Bill Land. I mean,
yes,
that strikes right at the heart, right at
yes,
the stomach.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you a funny story about Bill. Let me finish with uh, um, Brother Eliyahu. He was probably one of two or three that was most pivotal for me in my growth in theological and spiritual education. He supported my inquiry, validated that I was right on with some things, and he was my good friend and buddy and brother for many years. We were I say we were pregnant together. His son and my son, my baby boy, came along. We were going through all the same. Like, I was sicker than Pamela was when she was carrying. I had more morning sickness, and Pam was like, "Boy, what are you talking about? You ain't carrying nothing." So,
yeah, wow.
yeah, those were some pivotal times and days. The late '80s and early '90s for me in that walk together. Okay. So let's talk about your beginnings. You grew up in Washington D.C.
Yep, third generation Washingtonian.
And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about you and you just mentioned it, the cafe, but that which was a part of the Church of the Savior. So talk a little bit about your journey to ministry. You know, the earliest. I think that informs how we get to what you're now doing, quite frankly.
Okay. All right. Wow. Well, first, let me thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to be with you and with my kinfolk. And so I'm just glad to be in the house. I really am. And it's a joy, a privilege, and an honor. So thank you. Okay. Back in the day, I grew up in an ecumenical church called the Church of the Savior. That was pastored by a white Southern Baptist, believe it or not. I mean, I certainly had my roots in the black church. You couldn't be a third generation black Washingtonian and not have your roots deep in the Baptist church, both Shiloh and Upper Room in Southwest. And so, that was just a given, right? But that was long before I had been introduced to the Church of the Savior. My grandmother integrated the Church of the Savior way back in the day. She used to get dressed up in the nines, as they say, all dressed up in the nines. Right after the segregation laws, the district desegregated, and she used to get all dressed up, and she'd go down to Woolworth's and go up to the top floor and have a cup of tea, because that's all she could afford. But she would have, every Wednesday, she would go. And finally, my mother said, "Why are you going down there?" And she said, "Because if somebody doesn't go, the laws might change, because they may think that we really weren't serious about showing up. So since we work for this, we need to show up." That was my grandmother, Rose Williamson. Lord have mercy. Talk about coming back from speaking of the ancestors. She met a Southern drawled lady, and they sat there every Wednesday and became friends. And that lady invited her to church. And the church was a small, non-denominational church that was inspired by Gordon Cosby, who had been a World War II vet and had helped prepare people on the beaches of Normandy in those foxholes to stand up, charge, and die. That was his role. And he said after that, he never wanted to have anything to do with anything violent, and he was absolutely bent on making the world a better place, and he lived into that. Long story short, Gordon started a small church in a row house off of Massachusetts Avenue, 2025 Massachusetts Avenue. And his philosophy was different. He did not aspire to fill his church pews with a whole bunch of people. I mean, the church was growing. Started off with maybe 9 folk, and they grew. But he said he was inspired to break that larger church up into groups of 12 and have them sink down into not reliance on him for insight as to who everyone was called to be. He never felt that he was like the preacher. Never did. I mean, he preached, and Lord, he was a brilliant teacher. But he always felt, God rests in everybody. Spirit rests in everybody, and there's a reason why you're here. And how can you begin to discern what that reason is? How do you live into that? And so he broke folk apart and started this whole process of getting people to go inward to discern what their disciple piece was, their own personal discipleship part was. What is discipleship, and how do you live into that? And then how do you live into that in ways that allow you to grow into the whole stewardship, leadership role of secular ministry, even though he didn't call it that. And then how do you take that on to the world and make the world a better place? So there are a slew of nonprofits, small nonprofits, including Sojourners was actually inspired by that movement. But a whole bunch of things that broke off out of folks who came from those small groups and went into deep discernment about what they were called to do and then lived into it. And all of it very social or justice oriented, very meeting the needs of the most marginalized people in society and doing that in partnership with them. And that formed the basis of my theology, and also between that and the Black church experience meld together to form who I am to this day, really.
Thank you very much. So then let's keep going. You get bit with the bug.
I did.
And then you go to school. Howard then came up here to Boston. Ultimately, where'd you go to undergrad?
I started at Spelman, partied myself out, and finished as a proud graduate of UDC.
All right. Now,
and don't regret any part of that journey because it formed who I be.
So people don't know the University of the District of Columbia was in fact the normal school, the teacher school, and is an HBCU. We ain't gonna. I'm just dropping some breadcrumbs so you all can go do the work.
And always invited folk in, no matter where they came from or what their background was. That you could walk into UDC in any shape, form, but when you walked out, you were a scholar, and they made sure of that.
Absolutely.
So props to my alma mater.
Yes, and from there, then little Howard, and then came up here to Boston, went to school, got your footing, smitten bit with the bug of social justice, and right, and ministry in and on the ground. Talk a little bit about Bread and the work so talk a little bit about Bread for the World. Talk a little bit about your work with the denomination with A&T Bernice, the Reverend Dr. Bernice Powell Jackson. Let me just throw that in there. Who is road dog with my spirit mama, the
Reverend. It's got to be Yvonne.
And then talk a little bit about wrap that in the frame of some of that work that had Sojourners and some of these other justice works. And we're coming into the 90s and into the early 2000s.
Bernice had been with the Commission for Social Justice in the church before Justice and Witness formed. And while she was doing that work, I was still in seminary. And I always used to write her when I was in seminary. I was trying to sort it out. I was really trying to sort it out. I ended up with 2 master's degrees, one in journalism and one in theology. But the reason why that was important is because I learned how to read and write my first word when I was 12 because I'm dyslexic. And so I was really trying to sort it out. What is this? What am I doing in this space, in this place? And what is God calling me to be and do in this space? And how am I supposed to purpose the gifts that I'm not even sure I have? I mean, I was really sorting it out, right? Hence the reason I was chasing after God, demanding answers, and chasing after a journalism degree. Right? It all makes sense, right? Okay, so out of all of that, I was writing Bernice every so blue moon while she was in, while the while she was moving through the commission, and the UCC was really being formed even more than it had been at that point. And she always wrote me back something thoughtful. Always, always, always. Every once in a while, I say, I don't know what I'm doing. Always wrote me back something thoughtful. And when I came out of seminary, I went to DC, worked for the Potter's House for a while. Then worked with Faith and Money, I'm sorry, with Faith and Politics Institute on Capitol Hill for a time. And then up pops this email, and Bernice says, I've got an opening on my national staff as Director of Communications. They didn't call it that, but that's what it was, for Justice and Witness Ministries. I encourage you to apply. I applied. Long story short, she hired me. And so I worked there for 6 years. And then after having worked for Justice and Witness Ministries, just shy of 7 years, and Bernice had left and retired by the time I left, that's when I worked for the Obama campaign in 2008. And then after Obama was elected, and I was broke as all get out because I was stomping around Tidewater, Virginia, trying to get Virginia to turn blue, and it did. And then I was invited on to Bread for the World staff. Bread for the World has a mission of trying to end hunger and poverty in the world. So by the time most of my ministry has really taken shape in I am ordained, and had to decide whether or not I was called to do that. And I was, and I am an ordained minister and called to be an ordained minister. But my work has always been rooted in social justice aimed and or equity aimed ministry, and organizing people around that so that the work of aligning ourselves with the most marginalized people in society would occur.
I want to thank you for that, Auntie Bernice. I was reflecting, and let me just say, she'll see this maybe at some point or another, and so I haven't talked to you yet, but I'm praying for you, her partner in life, her husband Franklin went on to make transition, and he is now part of the ancestors. So we're praying for you and your family and our family as we are walking through this time of grief and loss that she is experiencing. I know her and Mama Yvonne are together. I think Mama.
I've seen them both in recent weeks, and they're doing all right.
Yeah. So listen, and Auntie Bernice's contribution, I think one of her significant contributions was her ability to write. She was a journalist.
Absolutely.
And for a number of years, it was her periodical. And I'm blanking on the name of it.
Witness for Justice.
Justice. That's exactly right. I saw it. I saw red writing with blue on it.
That's right. That's right. And I wrote those pieces so many a day.
Yeah.
As did many of us. Yeah. I would. So this is before email, young folk. This is before email. This is when people, you got something in the mail, but it came regularly without fail, and it always had a profound impact on everyone.
That's exactly right. And I used to keep them. In fact, I bet you I have probably 3 or 4 years worth of them in binders. I used to pick them and take them, and I would reread them. And somebody when I'm gone on and I've dedicated my papers in my library to somewhere, they're gonna get that, because I did keep them for a very, very long time. They're in my something or another. Pamela's always telling me, boy, you got to clean that stuff out. I keep that stuff just in case. But I think one of the reason I'm lifting it up, these connections in particular, and they are meaningful for a couple of reasons. We just celebrated Juneteenth, or just observed, and these observances, these celebrations, and I would say Juneteenth is just a placeholder for all the many ways in which Black folk here and across the diaspora did some Sankofa moments, remembering where we had come from, right? And also using those opportunities, those moments, whether it was Emancipation Day in Washington, D.C. in April.
Yep.
Right?
That's right.
Or whether for us in St. Louis, it was the May Day parade, first Sunday in May. Where we all got together and paraded down the street,
yes.
all fancy, and it was a lot of bomb pops for me, and dripping barbecue, and running around like a chicken with my head cut off, as little boys did, and then somebody would catch my eye, little girl, or something other. All of that going on. It's also those opportunities we had to do homecoming. My mother's from Waynesboro, Mississippi, and so all roads lead to Hollybush Baptist Church.
Come on now,
Waynesboro, Mississippi.
Come on now.
Just outside of Waynesboro, Mississippi, out there in the country, on the second Sunday weekend of August, right? So it's all of these August, in the diaspora, in the Caribbean. It's Trinidad and Tobago is August 1st. So it's all of that combined together. For me, these moments mark for us what Antonio Gramsci called it a conjunctural analysis. This phrase he developed, and then Stuart Hall kind of framed it and put some more meat on it. In essence, what they are speaking to is that there is a moment in time. There are moments that you can follow in time that then resonate for us in such a way that at a point we know we have changed from one place, maybe in epoch. We have gone from one moment to the next moment, and that we gotta pause for a moment. So for us, these Sankofa moments, these celebration moments, these moments that we get to call the roll, that we call the name. So I'm glad the Spirit just had us go to calling some of these ancestors, these folk who are important to us, these moments that are important to us, these spaces that are important to us, both to remember and reflect, to observe, see how far we've come, where we've come from, but also to know we still got some ways to go.
Hey. Absolutely. Yes.
So that's the significance of a Juneteenth. It's not just you get off.
No. It's just the beginning. It's just the beginning.
We can date it back to, let's talk about the, for me, it's also to note that that we are from a tradition of resilience and resistance, right? That it just so for me, then here's some more,
and they're interrelated.
Yeah. Here's some more connection for you. I can't talk about resistance without speaking of 1791, when Mama Cecile Fatima and Duty the bookman went out there and met in the Brush Harbor, right? With the Maroons of Saint Domingue.
That's right.
And all of a sudden called for the resistance. They didn't have the women.
They called forth Haiti. They called forth Haiti.
And Haiti, from 1791 to the ultimate independence in 1804, right?
That's Brother Dessalines.
That's exactly right. Dessalines, right? L'Aventure, L'Aventure before him.
That's right.
And all of the brothers and sisters, who were in the struggle, in the fight. For me, now here's where I'm at with this. We name these places and spaces so that we can then understand that we're not just in a local, but that we are also connected to something both wider and broader than us, and that these moments for us are moments of. I love what I watched one of your podcasts, you was with a sister, and you were talking about healing and wholeness and community.
That's right.
That this doesn't happen, right? The recovery of memory and vitality doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in the context of community. Could you spend a little time on it? Because now we get ready.
Ooh. Now we're getting into the bones
That's
and
it. That's right.
getting into the marrow.
That's right.
You know, if I had to put all that in biblical terms, I would probably pull out Revelation 21:1. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth has passed away. Has passed away. When something dies, something else is being reborn. It's regenerative. It never, ever just goes away. And we are living right now in the midst of that revelatory moment when systems are dying, and Jesus is calling the world systems into some of the world systems into dying while other things emerge. And this whole process of transformation, of recovery, healing, and transformation, that it's calling us to grow. We're having to grow. We're having to change. We're being forced to grow and change. And whether we want to or not, the world is moving on. Spirit is moving on. It is pulling us out of our places of comfort and challenging us to say, okay, now what you going to do now? Don't talk to me about what you've done. What you've done is what you did what I asked you to do. You've been faithful. But what you did when you were younger and what you're doing now as you're a little bit older, what you're doing in this season of this era, means that you have to keep growing. And that's where we are. We are all being invited to grow. And so one of the things that I've been focused on lately is since I left Bread for the World, actually, and I want to give Proctor Conference and Sister Iva her props for this, because she was the one who back in 2016 invited several ministers to become a cohort to discern what their next ministerial steps would be. And I had been in deep contemplation about that. And I was moving into this pause and a place of transition in my life and in my ministry. My parents were getting older. I had just gotten married. Knew I was going to have to leave. My parents were failing in health. And I was wondering what my next ministerial steps were. And here she was saying, okay, I'm going to give you some time to think about that. And I had been to Haiti. Several times, starting in 2009. So all that time from 2009 to 2016, I was discerning that question. And then she gave me dedicated time to discern. So when I left Bread for the World after just shy of 10 years of service in 2016, I sat around and I'll be honest with you, what came to me after having been when I went the first time to Haiti in 2009, I came back, folks hear woe is me stories about how Haitians only have $2 and some odd cents per, and that's true. That is true for many, particularly for folks who live in the rural areas, but they don't talk about the richness of the country. They don't talk about the spiritual depth of the country. They don't talk about the breadth of society, but I can go on about that's another podcast. We'll just talk about just that. But at any rate, one of the things that struck me the first time I went, I'd never been to the continent. I've not been to Africa. Not been stepped on the foot. So when I went to Haiti, it was the first time I'd gotten off the plane. It's all these black folks. I'm like, oh, sights, sounds, music, rhythm, colors. It all looks so familiar. I'm like, Lord, have mercy. And yet, I had this little blue passport in my pocket that said United States of America. So I was attached and connected and drawn and felt the connection. And yet I had this piece of plastic in my pocket that made me distinctively other. And I had to grapple with that. What did that mean for me? How do I place myself in the world as this Black woman who is oppressed in my country and is seen as part of the network of oppression globally? And what does that mean? How do I sit with that? I was wrestling with the question, John, What does that hyphen represent between the words African and American? What rests on that hyphen? There's a whole lot of stuff that rests on that hyphen when you look at a global context. What rests on that hyphen between the words African and American? Particularly when you're discerning your faith journey and your resources, what you believe, your faith, your shifting values, and your resources. Some people would distill that down into faith and money. I say faith is money is a narrow lens for people of African descent and for people of color generally. Beliefs, shifting values, and resources. How do you discern those three buckets when you're looking at whatever your hyphen is as a person of color in the United States? Because no matter where we come from or how we got there, when we get to the United States, we enter into a cultural norm that was not of our making if we are a person of color. The country was not founded on principles that were designed to benefit us. The country was founded on principles that were designed to support and advance the aims and interests of white men with property. And so that, whether you came seeking better opportunities, or you came in the bowels of a slave ship, or whether you were always there, Native folk, First People folk, or whether the southern border crossed you, no matter what we ended up interfacing with was a cultural norm, a white cultural norm that was not of our making. I'm not talking about white people. I'm talking about a white cultural norm. Hear the distinction. There are black folk who are deeply embedded into white cultural norms, and there are white-bodied people who are deeply non-cultural white folk. So let's not, it's not about pigmentation, it's about behavior and culture. And so I was looking at that for a great deal, and I started to write about that, particularly as it related to the Black church. I was seeking my own answers, just to sort it through. And I started thinking about, well, what does this mean for Black folk, my folk? When I go to Proctor and I look around the room, what does this mean for me and mine? And so I started to write an essay about that. And I did write an essay about it. And what came through that is that the shift that we're in right now is causing us to have to move through a recovery process that addresses our own culpability in the ways in which we buy into and behave in the ways that support our own oppression. Now that's a sensitive subject, because immediately when you hear folks hear that, they're like, she's blaming us for, we're the victims here of oppression, which is true. And now she's blaming the victims of oppression. I understand that impulse. I get that. I understand that. And it's absolutely true that we've been subject to racism, oppression, all that. We still are. But what are the ways in which we have accommodated the white cultural norm, which continues to perpetuate the very things that plague us? Because we can walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. We can deconstruct the racism and the oppression and still deal with the ways in which racism and oppression have harmed us, and the ways in which we wittingly or unwittingly, usually subconsciously, continue to live into patterns and ways of being where we actually accommodate that. We become codependent enablers of dysfunction. And we've had to do that. There's no shame in this. I'm not blaming here. I ain't wagging my fingers. No, because I'm talking about myself. I know I have accommodated white cultural norms during time to time in my life circumstances and in my career path, when I felt I had to in order to survive. Because if you don't do that and you're a person of color, if you don't do that and you're particularly of Black descent, then you suffer for that. This whole society rewards people who acquiesce to that cultural norm. And if you don't get that raise. You don't get that job opportunity. You don't get whatever it is, whatever that is. And so how do we do that? And to what And what happens as a result to us as a result of our accommodation of that. I've been digging into that. I've been digging into that through my own lens about myself and my own behavior. And as I dug into my own closet, then I realized I had some healing to do and I had some recovering to do. I needed to recover my own patterns of codependent enabling systems of oppression that were never designed to benefit us. And as I dug into that, I started a blog. And the blog is called Gemstones in the Sun. And I started to solicit people's stories about their belief shifting values and resources and the ways they feel that they have had to experience this way of acquiescing to cultural norms that were never of our origin, historical origin. The ways of, back in the day, when Ivan was talking about this, she was talking at the time about sufficiency and not, what's the word I'm searching for? And abundance. What was sufficient and what is abundance? And what is lack? And what do those things mean to us? And how do we think about them? And how do we categorize them? What do we think about them in the days of segregation? What do we think about them in our ancestry? What does sufficiency mean? What does scarcity mean? How do we think about these things now? And what have we taken from our predominant culture in terms of the way we define those things for ourselves? And then what do we take from our ancestral culture and the way we define those things? And one of the ways we started to get to the bottom of that is not only asking people to write about that, but we asked people to move through a particular exercise. And that was to write their spiritual autobiography. Just write it down. Write it down. What is it you first remember? And I'm not talking about, necessarily what was your spiritual autobiography. Some of that may be religious. Some of it may have nothing to do with that. But what is it? When did you come to a realization that there's something more to you than what you see in the mirror? What is that? And then write your money autobiography. What is that? My money autobiography started with my earliest memory. My earliest memory is when I lost my tooth. And the tooth fairy came. Okay? And when the tooth fairy came, I was about 3. Or maybe 4. And the tooth fairy came, and I would take my tooth and I would stick it up underneath my pillow. In the morning, I got this shiny little object called a quarter or a 50-cent piece. And I knew that I could do something with that 50-cent piece, that I could go up and have somebody take me up to the 7-Eleven store. And back then they had big buddies. You remember those long? And I could either choose to break apart the big buddy and share pieces of it with my friends, or I could go through the 5, 6, 7-year-old mind's discernment about, well, now it was my tooth. It was my tooth. So, do I really need to share my big butt? It was my tooth, my quarter. And so that's when my first sense of value around what my resources were formed. And once you start digging into that and comparing your money autobiography with your spiritual biography and see what tracks and what doesn't. And then we started digging through the layers of why and what that means. And so I was really looking at all those things about, with helping that whole process of shifting from idolatry to solidarity, from acquiring money at all costs to sharing abundantly. That whole shift of I've always felt that I was never enough to I've always been enough and I always will be enough. All that, it's a whole mind, body, spirit, collective energy shift, but it starts here. And you can't get to the outgrowth of what you can do with the healing process, the recovery process from a white cultural addiction to a norm that was not of our making. You can't collectively get to the place where you can really purpose we're so busy trying to survive, John. You know what I'm saying? We're so busy trying to scrape up I mean, everybody's trying to make it. And God knows it's hard out here. We're so busy trying. It's a luxury to sit back and say, okay, wait a minute, take a time out for just a minute. Time out. But if we don't do a time out to reflect on these things, we can't get to the place where we purpose our creative energy collectively in different ways. Where the white cultural norm isn't at the center of gravity and what we decide to do in order to take care of ourselves and our communities. Am I making sense?
You're making so much sense, and there's so many points along this that you sparked a bunch of stuff in my head. And so let me pull from this. I love, by the way, gemstones in the sun. That phrase alone sparks a whole lot of meaning making for me. But and I like what you liken it to, the discovery of one's own beliefs, but also not just our own beliefs, shifting values and resources. All right, not just one person, but our shared beliefs, our shifting values, meaning that what we valued, you named it, what you valued, as a little one, it may be not the same, and yet could be, that needs to be questioned, right?
Or revised.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
That's right. I mean, for real, it is. When did I get over being the hurt little boy?
Right.
I'm ready to be vulnerable here. The hurt little boy that was abandoned by family.
There you go.
That's a narrative that I got to deal with, and I've had to deal with it. And Lord, thank you, Pamela. You've had to deal with it too, my beloved. It so that I then get to decide a new way, a new narrative for not just me, but for how I operate in the world, which means then my worldview changes. My whole sense of me changed when I took my first trip as a teenager out of this country to another country, to England. That was my first trip abroad. And all of a sudden, I wasn't just the young man, the little boy, the young man that was becoming an adult, who was from the north side of St. Louis, from Kinloch, Missouri. That wasn't me any longer. I all of a sudden, in taking a trip abroad, became a global citizen. And what that now means, right? So if we're talking about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And you can't get to the global until you do with the local.
That's right.
Well, I have a can I share a brief story with you?
Sure.
Brief. Let's just say there's a black pastor. I'm making this up on the fly. Black pastor, okay? Who his congregants are very proud of him, and he works very hard. And so they shower him with him or her. So for the sake of discussion, let's make it him, because there have been more hymns around than there have been hers. We're going to be honest. Okay. And so there's a whole sense of abundance thing going on, because this pastor is now, whenever you become self-concerned as a faith leader or an organizational leader about where you are located and who you are interfacing with, as opposed to who you are serving and what their needs are, then all of a sudden you are becoming addicted to a white cultural norm. Okay? And when folks sometimes begin to reward you for that by giving you things, right? Whatever that might be, then there's a whole process of what happens to us as faith leaders who fall into that trap, and our congregants who are now in our dysfunctional codependent enabling us. So what happens when we into that space? And then that in that same church, there is a sister down the street who has a 3-year-old who is a single parent who is living in an underserved community, and the baby's eating paint off the walls. But she brings the baby to church every once in a while, and the person that she's with um, spends all of the money that they earn, however they earn it, on shoes so that they can feel good about themselves in their own skin. And so she brings the baby to church, hoping that the church, whose pastor is kind of doing pastor thing, being the pastor. But what's happening here in these two very different scenarios, the pastor and the family down the street, they're dealing with the same phenomenon. They're both striving to figure out ways to validate themselves while not taking care of their own deepest need, and they're addressing their own deepest pain. And because they haven't addressed their own deepest need and their own deepest pain, the 3-year-old who's eating pain is not getting served by the church nor his parents. That's what internalized oppression looks like. We don't deal with what's happening inside of us because there's never been a safe space and a place to be able to say that without being judged. But truth be told, there isn't a person on this planet, self included, that doesn't have something to recover from. Not one, and certainly not faith leaders. All of us have something to recover from. Well, why are we hiding that? Why are we ashamed of that? Why do we punish each other for talking about that? We should be affirming each other and giving each other a space and place to be able to share our stories, just like I just shared a fictitious story. Because when we share in community with each other what our stories really are about what's really happened to us, not just the racism and stuff that happens out here and the oppression, but what happens as a result of that in here. The refrain that tumbles into the room, the center of the room, of the commonality of stories, whether they be different people of color in the States or whether they be intra-related in terms of just like, for example, just within the within the African American community, let's say, or whether they be global. We all think that we're bearing something, this kind of weight. When we think about it, we think we're bearing it alone, but we're not bearing it alone. If you have been subject to colonialism, neocolonialism, racism, and oppression in this world, then your story is a whole lot more alike. The context may be different, but the content ends up, or maybe I should say that it was, the content may be different, but the context is the same. Say it that way. But we don't know it. We don't know it until we actually start to share our stories and then purpose that healing and transformation in ways that uniquely address our own specific needs, the greatest needs that we've ever had, not only internal but external. But you can't get to the place where you're not doing that crab in the barrel stuff where you're dragging people down, each other down, until you recognize that the first thing I need to do is to deconstruct my own pain and in community with other people who are working to do the same, so that we can get to the place where we can love each other and lift each other, and then we can collaborate in ways that we could never even. And you know who knows that? White folk know that. White culture folk know that. That's why they're freaking out. You've got a whole demographic shift happening. If we get this right,
yeah.
If we get this right and work from the inside out, thank you, Gordon Cosby. Working from the inside out, healing from the inside out, transforming from the inside out. Nothing can stop that. And even if once that idea catches, and there are means and ways to live into that recovery, both domestically and globally, game's over, and they know it.
Yeah, you just made me think about something that our dear brother and friend often says, Cornel West, Reverend Dr. Cornel West. He says it this way. He says to be to be really engaged in the work it means to speak a truth that allows suffering to speak. Or he said it this way: the conditions of truth is to allow suffering to speak.
That's it.
Right. So that if now I'm taking a shift. We ain't got but a few more minutes, but I'm taking a bit of a shift, because now one of the things we've been doing here recently is talking about and curating conversations about the role of the prophet. Right. So what I just saw you do is really, in a very, very succinct way, and not with a lot of flourish. It was very clear that our work has to be to do the internal work. And my beloved Pamela speaks of this often to me and to our community, our faith community, that if we got to do the inside work, we got to do the work right here so that it moves to the out. Right. There is
so that spirit moves us to there.
That's exactly right.
The spirit moves us there.
Yeah, it's got to be that, right?
Right. And
so that then the prophet's role in this particular context has to be to create the atmosphere for that to occur, to facilitate that. And I'm thinking about, in a different way, the way in which the prophet Nathan called on David through a story.
Yes.
That he was able to see his own sin, his own, not just this, indiscretion. It was a whole, he maneuvered and manipulated a whole thing to get what he wanted. But then, by his own words, to see, yes, King David, you are that man.
That's it.
Right?
That's
right.
It. That's it.
That in a fresh way. So maybe the role of the prophet has this component of facilitating, if you will. And so the work that you're doing with gemstones in the sun, I'm like, that's some good stuff right there. Allowing people to think through, to reflect through, to hear, the stories, to read and slow down just enough, so just enough, to take a little bit of self-reflecting,
and then purpose that collectively.
Yeah.
To do things that spirit would have us do in ways that we can scarcely imagine now, that would break us into a whole nother realm of collective being. And when I say collective, I'm not just talking about people of color. Yeah. I'm talking about oppressed people everywhere, no matter what their zip code is, what their pigmentation is, or where they live, or who they love.
Yeah, let's really be clear. Let's really be clear. What's happening right now? What's happening right now in the Ukraine? Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. All right. What's happening in Haiti right now?
There you go.
Now white supremacy is ruling the day there, but these are kinfolk struggling with kinfolk.
That's right.
What's happening in the Congo is kinfolk struggling with kinfolk.
Right.
Truth be told, what's happening right now in Palestine, Israel, are kinfolk. These are cousins.
That's right. That's
struggling with each other. You can't tell the difference between a Palestinian person.
I've been there. I know.
And they can talk like each other in such a way that you can't just look at them and say, "Oh yeah, I don't know." So these are peoples, right?
But the point is that you're making here in succinct terms is that hurt people hurt people.
Hurt people. That's the truth.
Hurt people.
Yeah.
And if you want to break that chain, so that hurt people can love each other, and lift each other in unprecedented ways, work from the inside out, and then purpose the outward work, organize the outward work, and ground the outward work in the inward journey.
Yeah, this work right here, what we're engaging on, and we right at our time, so we're gonna have to let this simmer for a bit. But let me close. Let's wrap it for right now. Okay. This is gonna take this work that you are suggesting that we engage in is going to take some absolute courage.
Yes, it does.
All
Yes,
right.
it does.
It's
It's
going
safe.
to,
Some people call our freedom circle safe space. I always call it courageous space. And it's a long-term thing. The
yeah,
recovery is a lifelong journey.
yeah.
It ain't something you just you go to a couple of meetings and you done. No, no, no.
You don't get
It's like no other. It's like any other addiction and recovery program. It's a lifelong journey.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just start and stop. It's a process. It's an ongoing process of healing and transformation. That's what this is.
And I'm reminded of what in the Gospels Jesus had done some things, and the disciples like, man, I'm paraphrasing y'all. Don't y'all hold it to me. But they were like, man, that's the bomb. Yeah, go get it, Jesus. And Jesus said, and they said, well, we want to do it too. He said, hold on. This right here comes by fasting and praying. You got to slow up for a moment, right? And you're gonna have to put some spiritual discipline. This is what
it's not a spectator sport.
That's exactly right. You're gonna have to slow up.
You have to walk the journey. You learn by walking the journey.
Yeah, that's right.
You have to walk your own journey, but walk it collectively.
Yeah.
Walk it collectively.
And we are all engaged in it. Listen,
everyone. If not, then then things won't change. and we'll just be addicted.
That's right.
And that's fine. But make a choice. Make it a conscious. What do you say? Conscious. Make it a conscious choice.
Yeah.
Choose.
Yeah.
Choose.
Yeah. This is. I want to talk some more. I want to first of all thank you for saying yes.
Thank you for the invitation.
And listen, sending that note, just saying hey, and making me remember that we're related.
Hey.
We had some connections way back when, that those connections are still as
before either one of us had gray hair.
Now that's the truth. That's the truth right there.
That is the truth.
That's the real truth.
You are doing amazing work, and I am so proud of you. It's just extraordinary. You always have, but you've taken it to a whole new level, and you wear it well, and offering it abundantly. And I cannot tell you how much I and so many are grateful because of the work you're doing.
Thank you. Listen, first off, our sister is in Costa Rica. Yeah. How many folk you
know? I'm a resident of Maryland.
Right.
But I'm often here in Costa Rica.
He's in Costa Rica.
I am a resident of Maryland. I ain't left you, DC. I'm still right on the DC Maryland border. but I do have spent a lot of time here in Costa Rica.
Yeah, Costa Rica is as you know, we Pamela and I have spent some time there, and look forward to the time we get to come back, and maybe we certainly will.
You better come on.
When you're there,
have some rice and beans for you on the stove.
Listen.
Now we put a little African twist on things, but it's all right.
That's all right. This good. This is good stuff. This is the stuff that life is made of, right? Mm-hmm. It is the collaborating, it's the co-mingling, it is the mixing, it's the being apart for a minute, coming back together. It is the self-reflection. It is the community exchange. It is who we are at our best selves to be better. The goal is got to be better. We got to be better. And so I appreciate you engaging us in this, what I call relevant conversation. This won't be the last time. I'm gonna hit you up again soon to be back at this space. Listen, family.
Thanks everybody for
you all know where we are. We are gonna be in these spaces and places. Do me a favor. Y'all know what we got to do. Y'all got to hit like and share and all that stuff y'all supposed to do. That's what I'm supposed to say. Or people that help me do all this stuff, they're gonna say, Bishop, you ain't say nothing about the such like. So do all of that for us. And listen, what we are calling for is that we spend some time, and the we is those of us who are faithful, who are relatively conscious, those of us who are justice seeking, justice seekers, those who are down with a little bit of truth, and you know, Cornel West said, justice is what love looks like in public, like tenderness is what love looks like in private. Right? We've got to be about sharing the love in that kind of way, just seeking justice, seeking these parts of us, so that when we collectively come together, and we come together in all kinds of ways and spaces and all kinds of settings and destinations. When we do, then we make a gumbo soup.
Hey,
everybody can get a little bit out of it.
Everybody.
Listen, family.
Love you, John. Love you, John.
Sis. Tell bro we say peace in the Middle East and hair grease and justice. Right on. All right. God bless everybody. We'll see y'all next time.
Peace out.